For broadcasting. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Texas Counts Weekly Update for the week of April 6th. We will get started in just a minute or two. We just opened up the webinar, so I imagine lots of folks are starting to come in now. So we'll get started in about 2 minutes. So if you need to grab something real quick from the kitchen or a drink, go right ahead and we'll get started soon. Thanks again so much for joining us. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all again for joining us for this week's weekly update. I know that you are hopefully familiar with us now, but we have Dr. Lila Valencia from the Texas Demographic Center, Census Sanchez from the NOLO Educational Fund, and then of course me, Katie Martin-Lightfoot from the Center for Public Policy Priorities. We are your hosts today. But we are so excited because we are also joined by Ms. Berta Rodriguez from the city of San Antonio. She is the census queen down in San Antonio, Bexar County, really leading and coordinating the efforts down in San Antonio. So she'll be sharing out some of the great work that they have been doing. So really excited to be joined by Berta today. In terms of our agenda, of course, just our general welcome. So thanks so much for being here. Genesis will walk us through some 2020 census updates. And then, of course, Dr. Valencia will take us through the data, kind of see where we are, especially after we celebrated April 1st last week. And just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone for engaging in Census Day activities. And Lila will kind of talk about how that outreach really impacted our numbers in Texas. And then, like I said, Berta will walk us through the great efforts they're doing in San Antonio and Bexar County. And then, as always, we'll wrap it up with questions. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and pass it off to Genesis to talk to us about what's going on with the census.
Hi, everybody. Genesis here. Thanks so much again for joining us. And thanks again for your commitment to continuing your outreach in your networks and communities, especially during this time. We know it's really difficult and it's different, right? Like we're all facing a new landscape. So I just want to provide some updates on what we learned from, if you want to go to the next slide, Katie. What we learned, so first, just some key changes. As I mentioned last week, as of now, none of the operations have made any shifts again. So we're still looking at the census field operations to return on April 15th. And we're also seeing, we still have an August 14th deadline for both non-response follow-up and the deadline to self-respond. And then as a reminder, the paper questionnaires are going out this week. So again, these questionnaires are staggered. The mailings from the Census Bureau, as you can imagine, they can't all go out at once. It's a huge strain on the postal service. And so but the Census Bureau sends these out in staggered portions. And so this is the week in which if people have not responded yet to the first 3 invitations, they'll start to receive a paper questionnaire. Next slide, please. So I wanna, now that we're, April 1st, we had a ton of momentum and Dr. Valencia is gonna talk about the success of Census Day 2020. There's some things I wanna lift up that we recognize we confronted on this day and also have been hearing a lot from community members. And so one is that a lot of people believe that they need an ID to respond to the census. This is not true. It's important to remind people that there is a non-ID response option, because a lot of people, there's also this idea that if you don't have the ID in your hand, you have to call, which is also not true. You can still go online. And so just for your convenience, I included here, when you go online and you start the questionnaire, where it says plug in your 12-digit code, it does have an option. If you do not have a census ID, click here, and then it's going to ask you to manually input your address. So all you need is your address to respond. So important reminder, what we heard based on the hotline operation that we held on April 1st is that folks are reporting really long call waiting times. And so I did mine a few weeks ago now over the phone prior to, it was like probably 10 days before April 1st. And it took me 22 minutes to do it over the phone for 2 people. So that's also kind of a long time. Again, it is a tedious process, but it is a preferred process for a lot of folks. So we shouldn't dissuade people from using this method of response. But right now there's 2 things. So originally the Bureau was going to do something called callbacks. So basically, can we go back? Thank you, Katie. So what would happen is if you called, the Bureau would say, hey, there's going to be a long waiting line. You want to give us your phone number, we'll give you a call back in real time, in adequate time. They had to stop this operation because of COVID-19. And they also have had to decrease their phone operations because they can't have a packed phone banking station, essentially. They're practicing social distancing. So this is what has resulted in a long call waiting times. One of my colleagues supported her parents in doing theirs, and it took her 45 minutes on April 1st. That's a really long time to take to do your census. So I'm lifting this up because we are working with the Census Bureau directly they know it's an issue, and so they're working on it as well. One thing that they're attempting to do is a virtual call center. So having their staff continue to work from home. We were hopeful that this would have ramped up a little quicker, but it hasn't. So once this starts to kind of be shifted over and we're starting to see a little bit more adaptation from them, we'll definitely continue to report that back. But just letting you guys know that it is something we're keeping an eye on. Additionally, the one question we got across the board is, how do I fill out the Hispanic origin and race portion of the census? This is the question we were most asked in 2010. We had the same hotline operation. It continues to confuse people to no end. So I'm actually going to talk a little bit about that. Undocumented immigrants express a lot of frustration that they were left out of the stimulus package. And so this is another hurdle we're going to have to confront. Truthfully, and it makes a lot of sense, right? We don't have that one-on-one contact right now. And a lot of people are saying, well, I'm not getting anything from the stimulus package. This government clearly doesn't care about me. Why would I do the census, right? So we have to continue to promote the census as something kind of distinct on its own, reminding people this is for 10 years, not just, this situation, letting people know that, sorry, I have a cat, y'all, letting people know that this is kind of an unprecedented situation, and that, yes, people are right to feel frustrated, but that the Census Bureau participating in the census continues to bring back funding down to our local communities, to our schools, to our first responders. And so making that connection, we've seen time and time again, research shows that you have to add value to a census message and explain to people why is it so important. And I would also, I also want to flag, because this is something I dealt with a lot, and potentially so did my peers. A lot of the media messaging right now is trying to capture the frustration of census outreach and saying, well, maybe this is going to be a failed census. This is not a really productive message. And so if you do have interviews or you're talking to people, it is important to kind of continue framing the census as a positive experience. It's more than appropriate to say, hey, there's some frustrating parts about not being able to be in community with people, to not be able to be one-on-one with them. But we don't want to spend too much time saying, well, there's a potential to fail. We should continue to push it back. I personally think this is going to cause a lot of disruption and a lot of negativity around the census, which research has shown that if you attach a very negative message to census, people will not participate. So we want to just continue reiterating those messages as well. If we can go to the next page, Katie. Thank you. So I'm going to try very briefly to talk about the Hispanic origin and race questions, because this is, again, a question that, well, a two-part question that baffles everybody. This is what it looks like if you guys have seen it already. The first is, it'll ask, is this person of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And then what is this person's race? Next slide. So why does the census ask these questions? This is another thing that we were asked too. People didn't mind sharing the information, but they wanted to know, why would you ask me this? Are you going to use it to target me? So one thing key to remind folks is that the information that you share cannot be used against you. So it can't be used to target individuals for immigration enforcement or enforcement of other violations. So we're looking at things like housing codes, public benefits, or arrest warrants. The census asks this for both public and private sector planning. It ensures fair and representative reapportionment and redistricting. And it kind of helps us reveal the persistent disparities that have happened because of historic discrimination. And it gives us a fighting chance to eliminate those disparities. If we don't show up, then people can say, well, they're not here. So we can't really fight for certain civil rights or continue advocacy on certain issues. So it is very important. It's also, I want to point out that the Office of Management and Budget is the federal agency that determines the standards for federal data collection. So they had determined these questions. So it's distinct from the Census Bureau. And then the combined question format there had been a lot of discussion about this question. So the idea was that instead of having a two-part question, we would have one that would include, that would basically say, are you white, Latino, Black, American Indian, etc. And so instead of having those two, it was just one. We saw that based on research, it worked really well. It didn't disrupt data collection. And one of the things that was up for discussion was whether the Bureau was going to include a MENA category or not. So for those of you who don't know, MENA, it refers to Middle Eastern and North African. Unfortunately, in the 2020 census, there is no MENA category. So this is another frustration. This is not just a frustration for Latinos, but generally for a lot of immigrants. Next slide, please. So the key things that we want people to know. The census is only going to report one Hispanic origin. And we're telling you this, but you have the right to share this information as you see fit. Personally, if someone says, well, I'm Dominican and I'm Mexican, I'm not going to tell them we'll only pick one, because that doesn't seem fair, right? This is already a kind of tenuous process, but just know that the census only reports one Hispanic origin. Another key thing is that some Latinos consider themselves of many races, and so they can choose as many racial categories as they identify with. Some Latinos do not consider them as part of any official race category on the census, and they can mark some other race and write in what they want. So again, you can identify with more than one race, as many as you identify with. It is important for Latinos to answer both. So that's another thing. In 2010, there were a lot of blank submissions for the race part, simply because Latinos specifically said, well, I don't see myself in the race portion, so I'm not going to answer this question. Next slide, please. So another thing to consider is that if you check off some other race, the very bottom box, or you don't check off a race, the Bureau is going to assign you to one of these races. So again, it is important to choose something, because the Bureau will then decide for you in any case. And some of the positives are that there are new options to indicate specific white or African-American origin. So for instance, if you're Afro-Latino, you can identify yourself easier in a more easy way on the 2020 census. And so I know that this doesn't necessarily answer the question of like, so what if people ask me, right? You want to continue just to suggest to people that they pick the identity that they most self-identify with. And this is really hard. And I'm acknowledging that this is not great advice. Unfortunately, we can't really be the gatekeepers of what race looks like. We understand, I think it's important to affirm people's indecision, to say, yes, it's very confusing. but to continue to amplify that it is very important for people to respond to these 2 questions, and to think about, what is it that you want to include in any of these portions. So just continue to have those conversations. We have resources on this. So if you want to go to the next slide, Katie. So again, you can find all our resources at hagasecontar.org/resources. So you can download all of these things. In the fall, we created a policy brief, and we held a webinar on both of these questions. There's a long history of it. Way more than I have time to get into. And so it kind of helps people understand, like, why is it that we have these questions and how can we better prepare for answering questions around it. In addition, people should know that there's a lot of advocacy on this issue. People are already starting to prepare for 2030. It takes a long, long time, as you can imagine. And truthfully, a lot of the work that was done on the 2020 census was upended by the administration. So a lot of that work was thrown out. And so you can imagine the Census Bureau has to do their job. And so some of these things, they understand it's imperfect. They're not here to say that it's not, or to say that it's like very well designed. They understand it. So just know that the frustrations are there, that it's okay to address them and to offer people as much guidance as you can. In addition, we have our digital and communications toolkit, and then we also have guidance on how to fill out the questionnaire, both in English and Spanish. I also want to share that next week we'll be hosting a Latino Census Week. It won't be as intense as April 1st, but it's an opportunity for us to engage with our Latino communities a little bit more. And then again, if you guys want to share or access our hotline, the number is there. And we're ready, to provide resources to the community directly. And I think that's it. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat box. But if not, I'm going to pass it over back to Katie.
Thank you so much, Genesis, for covering such an important topic. And I don't believe we have any questions yet in our chat box. But if anyone does have any questions, feel free, if you're watching on Zoom, to pop them into the chat box. And then for folks watching Facebook Live, we're monitoring that as well. So feel free to put your questions in there as well. But now I want to pass it off to Dr. Valencia to kind of help us look at the data and see how Texas is doing in our self-response rate.
Hello, everyone. Pardon my overly casual attire for today. I'm trying to put in a workout. I will just say I got through my warm-up really well, but that's as far as I got. So baby steps. But I'm really happy to be here with you guys. And I want to say, Genesis, thank you very much for that race ethnicity sort of overview. I just want everyone to understand, like, race and ethnicity is like a super fluid demographic concept, and it's so personal to so many of us that one thing I wanted to add was just that even though the Census Bureau and our office too, we take data based on the responses that you've provided to the census form or on the census form, and we categorize it into different groups and clusters to facilitate, ease of presentation, right? So we do our estimates and our projections for 5 race and ethnicity groups, but the thing that you should know is that the data that you provide is, preserved forever, right? So when we are able to go back into your decennial census form 72 years from now and look at that ancestry data, and, your family members and your relatives will be able to see how you identified yourself, not how the Census Bureau clustered you or how the Texas Demographic Center described you in, the 2020 decade, but how you identified yourself. And so it may feel like some of that empowerment is taken from us when we, kind of form those smaller clusters when representing those statistics, but feel free to describe yourself and identify yourself in whatever way you see fit, because those data are preserved. So anyway, I just wanted to add that really quickly, but I'm going to share just a few of the statistics that we have been monitoring using the self-response rate tools that are available. Katie, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So we have a new tool now. I'll briefly describe a little bit of the two tools that we have been covering the last couple of weeks. The first one is the Census Bureau's self-response map. Again, you go to the 2020 census.gov website, and under Know the Facts, it's the last sort of category that takes you to those response rates map. On that page, you'll find response rate data as well as a map, and I'll get a little bit more into that in the next few slides. But the next tool is the CUNY Hard to Count map. This is a map that many people are familiar with because they've been using it to sort of target and do their strategic planning on how they're going to target different communities to get out the count. And then the last more recent resource that was made available by the Census Bureau is a Tableau dashboard. It does not include a map, but it gives you a real quick snapshot of rankings. And so I'll share that with you as well. Next slide, please. So here is the Census Bureau self-response map. You'll notice at the very top where it's circled there, there are rankings here. If you click on that, you'll actually go straight to that dashboard that I just talked about. But basically, as of yesterday, the US had a self-response of 44.5%. The state that's in first right now is the state of Minnesota. They've counted, or they've, responded. 53.9% of their households have responded. And then we have the state of Texas in 42nd. And we've got about 39.7% of our households that have responded. I'm really hoping that we get past that 40% mark, because that will change our color on the map and we'll start to look a little bit more like the rest of the nation. But go ahead and click to the next slide, please. And so here is a closer look of that same map. You can select the state and look at the county view. You can also look at the city view or congressional district view, tribal areas. But here we're looking at the county map. And what you'll see is that there are parts of Texas that have that lighter, sort of orange cream color in parts of Texas. And for the most part, a lot of those counties are in North Texas. North Texas is doing really, really well. Rockwall County and Collin County have both counted over 43% of their population. I believe that was the latest number I was looking at. And they also have, we also have really good, strong performance from Fort Bend County. Then we have, other counties that are still sort of catching up, right? So we have Travis County and Bexar County are both at very similar rates. They're at about 42%, I believe. And then the county that is needing a little bit of extra boost, or two counties, are Harris, of the most populous, are Harris County and El Paso County. Now, there are also some more rural parts of the state that really need extra additional attention, and you see those in the darker colors of the state. And so those are going to be, for the most part, in more rural parts of the state, as well as parts of the border. When we start looking at the census tract map, we'll be able to see a little bit more detail on that. But I also want to share, as Katie and Genesis have both mentioned, the Census Day actually brought a really good jump in self-response. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'll show you sort of the trend line for the state. So the blue line is the self-response rate. So these are the numbers that we have been seeing. And so we are right below 40% as of today. Now, all of those orange bars are the daily response increases. And for April 1st, you can see that we had the biggest jump that we've had since we started tracking these data. And so we really saw like almost a full 3% increase from the day before to Census Day. Now, the other thing you'll notice is that the weekends definitely represent a little bit of a lull. So we see some drops in the weekend days, and that's okay, right? People are, focusing on other things, or maybe they're logging off their computers and, just paying it, spending some quality time with family. But this is sort of the way that the data have been looking. And I really just want to thank all of you who are on the call and your teams, because that census day jump really reflects not only, that people were aware that it's census day, and so we see higher responses, but really that awareness and that motivation was fueled by all of your efforts. So thank you very much for doing that. And so now, it's clear that we have to work a little bit harder to get that little bump back up, right? Because census day has come and gone. And so really the message that we want to continue to share is that the count continues, and that we want to make sure that people are able to get back online, or like Genesis mentioned, now that those mailing forms are going to be coming in the mail, then people can turn those paper forms in by mail as well. Next slide, please. So this map, the data that I shared with you from the Census Bureau self-response map has an area where you can share it. It's on the lower right corner. You can share it on your social media, or you can download it. You can also download the data through an API extract if you're using some mapping or software to look at these data. And then you can also get a CSV file or a spreadsheet, right? There's additional documentation for you to be able to understand the data a little bit further. So for instance, there's a little bit of a question of exactly what is the self-response. Some people were confusing it with sort of a net count or an undercount, and it's not a count of the people who are in the household, right? It's just whether a household was invited by the Census Bureau and whether they have responded. If that household was vacant, or if that household didn't have anybody that was living there because it's a summer home, like none of that information is in those data. And also the number of people who live within those households is not part of the data. So it's not an actual count, it's just a representation of everyone who's been invited and the percent who has responded from that universe. And then there's also even a video tutorial that you can use to sort of get more acclimated with those data. Next slide, please. Now, when you really want to drill in a little bit more, I think the Census Bureau data, self-response data is very important, because you're able to pull the actual self-response rates for all of different geographies. The CUNY hard-to-count map is really helpful when you want to zoom into an area and understand what's happening, right? So here we see the net response for the state of Texas, and I believe that what it's showing is as of 3/29. So this is an older sort of representation. But if you zoom to the next or forward to the next slide, we'll start looking at some of the counties that are showing pretty low self-response, right? So Duval County, it's sort of in the middle part of South Texas, but south of San Antonio, to the east of Webb County or Laredo area, and it's got a self-response of about 9%. Now, if we want to understand this a little bit more, we want to look at the tab that says Census Details for Duval County. So if you'll go on to the next slide, please. So here we are able to pull up the Census Bureau contact strategy. Now we know that update leave has been delayed by the Census Bureau because of COVID, but that is only part of the explanation for Duval County. So all of the area in yellow is absolutely update leave. So that explains a lot of the lower response, right? But there are also pockets of green and light green. So that means that these individuals actually received an invitation to participate in the mail, as well as an actual paper form, because they had an internet choice method of contact from the Census Bureau. So if you are working in Duval County, then you're able to see what parts of Duval County may be okay for you to reach out to and say, hey, we know that you've gotten your mail, you've got a form in the mail, how can we help you, get closer to mailing that back to the Census Bureau. If you go to the next slide, you can zoom in on a particular census tract in this, within Duval County. And within this census tract, you'll be able to get statistics about who lives there, right? So we see that in this particular census tract of Duval County, there are over 92% is Hispanic, about 3% is African American. Next slide, please. It's got some animation, yeah. So, and you'll be able to get additional statistics. So if you keep pulling down on that down arrow, you can see other types of hard to count populations. So low income population, the immigrant population. Next slide. And there's quite a few statistics that you can get. You can see if there are how many children under 5 or what percentage, if they live with a single mom, if they have low income, if there are, what share are renters. And so you're able to really understand sort of the area that you can reach out to and what sort of message you may want to approach them with. Next slide, please. Okay, and next slide. There we go. So here, again, you're able to share this map. So if you're dealing with a community partner that is in a particular part of Duval County, you're able to share this map with them so that you can sort of have a conversation about like, how can we work together to get the count out in this area? You can also, there's a data tab there that you can download some of that information they have both percentages and estimates for all of those hard to count populations that we were talking about. And so I really find this application to be the most helpful in really being able to drill down into the areas, the smaller geographies, and really target and strategize how you're going to reach these communities. Next slide, please. And now I'll cover a little bit of the Census Bureau self-response Tableau dashboard. You can find this by going to Tableau Public and looking for the Census Bureau's site. But I also put the link in there. And then also if you go to the Census Bureau self-response map, you can now find it at the top where it says, go to see rankings here. But the first half of the dashboard sort of shares the national response rate, right? So it tells you about how many households have responded, the percentage of that, and what percentage of that was actually from internet. And then you get to see the rankings of the state. So you see here that Texas is ranked at 42nd, and we've been at 42nd since about the 3rd day of self-response data. And you see that when we have a response rate of about 40%, then that means that we have about 4.8 million households that have responded in the state of Texas. Next slide, please. The bottom part of the dashboard shares information that can be customized. So there's like, you can look at the total, or you can look at the internet response. You can look at the daily response rate. You can also look at areas by population. So if you only want to look at small cities that are about, 50,000 people, or if you want to look at how the large counties are doing or how the large metro areas are doing, you can select that through the population range. You can also pick the state, right? So I've selected Texas here. When you select a state, it'll rank the counties in order. And so I'm sorry, I think I totally shortchanged Rockwall and Collin, but they have their response is actually over 50%. So they've got about half of their households have responded to the 2020 census, and so that's great. And you see there that Fort Bend is really close behind. And then you also get the ranking for the cities. And you can, scroll down and look for the different cities. And then you can also select by either city or townships, because some people, and in some geographies, this is very distinct, and you can sort of pick through those. But this is sort of the latest dashboard that's come out of the Census Bureau, and I find it really helpful for just getting that really quick snapshot. And if you go on to the next slide, it's also a great opportunity to give you some bragging rights, right? So if your area is doing really well and you see that there's a neighboring county or a neighboring city that is sort of close to you in response rate, then maybe you can set up a response rate challenge, and you can, reach out to them and sort of keep each other accountable, keep each other motivated, and, really try to get the word out to the community through that friendly competition. And the Census Bureau has these badges, or their images that you can just sort of post on your social media to really figure out and really encourage people to kind of go in and look to see how well their area is doing. And then if they haven't responded, then maybe you can link to that as well. And next slide, please. And I think that's all I have, but Okay, yeah, this is the last slide. So I'm going to ask you guys a little bit of sort of some questions because we're trying to understand, you know, how you're monitoring self-response if you're looking at those data. And so here, for instance, we see an image from the city of Arlington. They've put together this weekly update that shares the Arlington response rate, the US response, Texas, and then the county response. And then they've got their map that's at the census tract level that really looks to see where the responses are higher, where the pockets are that have lower response. It reminds people where to go to respond to the census. So it's a real nice snapshot that really gives a lot of information and then still has that sort of motivation in there to respond and facilitates that through the inclusion of the link. Now, I was wondering how many of you are monitoring your self-response data, and if you are, you know, are you producing something like this? Are you producing like a weekly update? Do you have somebody on your team who is working through these data? Do you have that skill set on your team and are able to monitor those data? Are you having any data needs? Do you need somebody to be able to give you either a packaged update like this or just, you know, like a training session with either the CUNY map and the Census Bureau self-response map to kind of understand how you can pull your own data? And so maybe we can take just a couple of minutes for you to kind of share a little bit about that in the chat box and let us know, you know, like I mentioned, you know, one, are you monitoring your response data for your area? If so, how? Is it internally? Do you have someone on your team, or is it externally? Are you relying on somebody else to produce something for you? If nobody's doing that for you, but you have an interest, is this something that you want to learn to do for yourself? Or is this something that you really need somebody to produce something for you and send you this nice package? So if you guys would just take a couple of minutes and kind of just go through some of those questions and respond to them in the chat, that'll be really helpful to us because we're trying to find resources and allocate resources to being able to understand what is needed and how we can help bring you closer to a resource like that.
As for responding, Dr. Valencia, I'm gonna go ahead and answer some of the questions that were asked.
Sure.
Alex asks, if we don't actually know the number of people living in these places because that's what we're counting, are these numbers based on an algorithm or from 2010? I think when this question popped up, we were looking at response rates. And so I hope I'm answering your question, but what the maps measure is response rates by household. So we can't necessarily know, we don't actually know how many people are responding. What they're tracking to see is the household responding based on the universe that the Census Bureau has collected. So the Bureau has a master list of all the addresses that they send material to or make contact with. And so that's what the response rate is. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that if you do want to understand the population and how big your target area is, those data are available in the CUNY map. You get the population estimate from the American Community Survey. So it's an estimate. And so it's actually in that same box where it has the statistics for that particular geography. You'll get at the very bottom the statistic for their population.
Thank you, Dr. Valencia. So she also covered how to explain by tract, but again, if this is a continued need, that's also why we want to bring this up. Another question is, how should the homeowner respond if there's a vacant or second home? So if you go online and you have a vacant or second home, you should plug in the address of that second home it'll pop up a screen that says, will you be living at this address on April 1st, 2020? You want to click no. And then from no, it'll ask you, is this second home or address a rental property? Is it being, is it in the process of being rented? Is this a seasonal or occasional home? And then there's a few other options. So definitely use that option. The Bureau still wants to know if if they're targeting a household and no one is responding, they're going to continue sending messages to that household, even if no one lives there. So they do want to know that information. In lieu of COVID-19, what are some of the strategies in getting the count out? We're actually going to cover that with Berta. And then I think there was one more. So the yellow, yes. The yellow means update leave in terms of how the Census Bureau does their operations contact. How do they contact you? Update leave means that they go to the address, leave a packet of information, and then continue sending you reminders. And so this is we've mentioned this before, but this operation is being stalled into, or not stalled, but being held off until April 15th as of now. And this does heavily impact a lot of these regions where Dr. Valencia covered that there's those dark areas. A lot of those areas depend on update leave. So that's also why many of them are not responding. And it also does, internet access, it has more to do with the internet choice versus internet first mailing, which you can also kind of look through in the hard to count CUNY map. And then, okay, so folks have also responded to the questions that we were posing. Did you want to add anything else, Dr. Valencia?
The only thing I'll add is that we're gonna, take a look at all of your responses because we're able to, capture that and review it at a later time. And so we'll look at all of that and we'll look to see, what people's needs are. In the meantime, if you do have any issues accessing some of the CUNY map data, there is a link there where you can get additional help from them on the contact page. There's I think it's an info email address, but you can also feel free to email us at the Texas Demographic Center, tdc@utsa.edu. So that's TDC as in Texas Demographic Center at UTSA as in University of Texas, San Antonio.edu. And we'll, help you while you're trying to get that down. But we'll also, just let you know that we're working to try to assess what it is that we can put together that may be helpful to a larger community as well.
Great, thank you so much, Lila. And folks, we are going to be monitoring that chat box. So if you haven't already put in your data needs or want to share with us how you're collecting data, please put that information in. It just helps us help you and your fellow Texans better. Now we're going to switch gears. I'm super excited for our guest speaker today. We want to talk about 2020 Census Outreach. And again, I would like to introduce Ms. Berta Rodriguez. She is a Census Administrator for the City of San Antonio and just a Census champion and queen all around. And so Berta is going to share a lot of bit about what they've been doing in San Antonio and Bexar County, and hopefully some of these ideas can really resonate for the work that you're doing as well. So without further ado, Berta, take it away.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for allowing me to share the ideas that we have generated in San Antonio and Bexar County. I didn't know I should have worn my little tiara, which I usually do wear around the house. I'm just kidding. The compliments are very nice, but I do want to share the fact that it is in collaboration with the county. We have a very strong partnership with the county. We also have an amazing complete count committee that has continued to push forward with us in identifying what we should be doing. And so I can't take all the credit. I also have an amazing staff member, Mary Mills, who some of you may have interacted with before, who is part of this process. So to all of you who have been on the ground, let me just say, I get it. We've been in a state of a little bit of disbelief. We spent a lot of time, I don't know about many of the other communities. I think I share this with a lot of the communities that I've talked to. We've been planning since the summer of 2018. We had a lot of strategies in place. We spent numerous hours doing strategic planning. My professional background is in strategic planning, marketing, advertising, community organizing. And as much as I thought we had looked at all of the things that we were going to need to have in place for contingency plans, this was never, ever in the scope of anything that we thought we had to plan towards. So having said that, just know that in San Antonio, Bexar County, we're in the same boat that everybody else is in. Fortunately, what we have that many local entities may not have is that we have a budget. We not only have a city and county budget, we also have through the very gracious and foresight ability of Hogg Foundation and Texas Pooled Fund. We have dollars that have come in through that we're using. So what we've done internally, we have looked at our strategic plan and we have completely pivoted. We have taken and we have redirected our initial funding that was going to go for grassroots community events, event marketing, whether it was a fiesta event or whether it was going to be an event that our LGBTQ community created around pop-ups throughout the county. A lot of the dollars that we were going to allocate for this have now been redirected. But before I get to how we've redirected some of those funds, I do want to say that we still have some organizations. For example, we have Avances San Antonio, who is an organization that works with families and children. They oversee some of our early Head Start and Head Start programs. They've continued to engage with their residents or the families that they work with. For example, they're delivering at the doorstep boxes of diapers and wipes and other family necessities. And they've reached out and they've said, what can we put in there that's census related? Well, so we were working through pre-K for SA and they had developed an activity booklet. And so we're going to be producing a census activity booklet that we will place inside of those boxes, whatever the case may be for that week, whether it's supplies or food. And we will be putting census information that gets delivered to the doorsteps, of course, practicing all the social distancing and all following all the declarations that are being set by the state and by the city and county. Another example is we have our Mexican American Unity Council that has 3 housing properties here in San Antonio. They have community workers that still are making health and wellness visits to some of their senior older populations within their housing developments. And as they make their health and wellness check visits, they are incorporating a census message into that. They'll be using some of our push cards and information that we have on our toolkit, and the website that you see up on the screen has a toolkit section if you want to visit and some of the things that we'll be using. So as they visit these individuals, they will be messaging the census. They've also received some funding and they're going to be creating challenges within their population, and their giveaway is going to be food gift cards. They looked at what was the need for this population, and so the reward will be a food gift card, and they're still working on the mechanisms for how they'll be creating this census challenge among their properties. But something that we offered when we learned that they were still able to have some engagement with the residents within their housing population is we offered the swag that we had already purchased and paid for at no cost to them. We said, if you have a way to get to the public, we have t-shirts, fans, magnets, push cards, clapping hands, you name it. We want to put it in any resource box that you deliver to your community. Let us know. We will meet you at the office and leave it at the doorstep for you to pick up, however we have to do this. But we know that a lot of you might be sitting on some swag that you are not quite sure what to do. If there are opportunities to give that away, to donate it to organizations that are still engaging with the community, I highly recommend that because at some point in time, they will be useless to us. The census will be done and we'll have a bunch of t-shirts that none of us really want to walk around wearing. So that's one of the ways that we've also tried to utilize some of the already purchased materials that we didn't want to have go to waste. Through our ISDs, I will say that our independent school districts are probably the ones that are having the most to do. that we are giving a little bit more time to. And I will share that what we have learned is that for the organizations that are ready to move, we're ready to move with them and very aggressively. But for those that we have worked with so closely that we know we're committed, that have said, give us a little bit of breathing room. We are being mindful and respectful of the fact that these ISDs, for example, we had identified as being in those hardest to count census tracts. And if you look at those ISDs, they're not only dealing with a population that's hard to count, they're also dealing with a population that is now having difficulty accessing, continuing the education of their children. And so one of the things that I will suggest to you is be mindful of the organizations that are not quite ready to be engaged. Don't forget about them, but just be mindful that as committed a partners that they were before, they will be there. They just need some time to get their situation in order. And so from an ISD perspective, we had been trying to pursue using the school campuses as real estate for advertising, maybe putting a banner, maybe putting a yard sign out in the neighborhoods, because we know that these are still in the communities where there is traffic and people go by there. But what we were sensing is that that wasn't a strategy that was ready to be implemented. And so again, we will pull back a little bit. We won't give up on the idea. We still think it's a very viable strategy, but we will respect and be mindful of what these ISDs are going through right now. And, you know, Pedro Martinez from the San Antonio ISD did a briefing last week, and he talked about how his main priority is distributing technology and finding hotspots for these children to access their schoolwork. So I'm not about to go to somebody like Pedro and say, well, you know, while you're trying to do that, can you message the census for me? I know he is a committed partner. I know that all our ISDs were, and we're going to give them a little bit of breathing room. We're exploring similar strategies to use real estate with our churches. One of the strategies we're exploring is going to our local churches. We know that their Sunday collections are a little low these days. And so what we're going to be offering them is a stipend, a small stipend, maybe $300 or $400, for them to allow us to put a yard sign or to put a banner or to use their marquee to census a message. And so that it becomes something that's beneficial for the community, but it also helps our faith-based community during a time where they're needing that support. So those are some of the grassroots things that we're still looking at. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we diverted some of our dollars, and the things that we've implemented thus far is we've entered into a relationship with the GSTV, gas station television, and we started our gas pump ads on April 1. We will be running gas pump ads for the next 8 weeks. We will have English and Spanish ads that'll rotate across the day, across 130 stations in Bexar County, which puts us in about 1,190 gas pumps throughout the day for as long as those gas stations are open. We know we'll walk out of this 8 week with about 1.7 million impressions, which means that 1 million people will actually see these ads. We even went back and said, hey, we know people aren't going to be using as much gas. Are you sure this is still a viable strategy? And we've got some statistics from them that show that this is one area of our economy that hasn't begun to suffer yet. So we're still very hopeful for that. We're also going to be going into Family Dollars and Dollar Generals. We have a total of 45 combined stores here in Bexar County. We're going to be using the cash register receipts with a Spanish and an English language ad on the back of the receipts. That'll give us about a 309,000 person impression on a weekly basis. Some of that may be duplicated over the next 12 weeks, but we'll do a 12-week flight on those register receipts. And what was interesting, yesterday there was an article about how the South Independent School District, there was an independent school district in the south of Bexar County where they're in a food desert. and where they have to travel 8 miles or more to get to a local grocery store. Yet, however, within their area, there were 4 Family Dollars that they were being able to access. And so for us, we are trying to find where the residents still are going. How can we engage with them without doing that on a one-on-one? And so we're hopeful for this cash register receipt strategy. We'll also be doing over the street banners. I don't know if you're familiar with them in other localities, but here you probably are, because I think they're statewide. Dixie Flags has over the street banners, and we will be placing 40 over the street banners in hard to count census tracts starting in May. And then in June, we'll rotate that out to another 40 locations, again, in hard to count census tract with a get counted now message. Those are just a few examples. We're very excited, and we're still hoping that we can implement our door hanging strategy. Our plan is to go into about 150,000 households with a get counted now door hanger. In light of sheltering in place, in light of COVID, we're trying to ensure that the community will be receptive to that and not, fear having somebody come by their door. So we're going to be making a decision on that, but we're hoping that will get us into community at a little deeper level. We're so thankful for our partners who were part of the planning process. We're hearing back from some of them. For example, Spurs. We had planned a huge on-site activation with Spurs using our coyote mascot, and we've not been able to do any of that. But we got a call about a week and a half ago from the Spurs contact saying, "Look, we haven't forgot about the census. We know it's important. We're messaging out to 1,000+ employees internally with the importance of filling out the census." We also have an amazing partner in one of our FQHCs who has called and said, "We do a year-long buy for billboards that are deep in community. We'd like to offer to swap out 18 of those billboards with census messages at no cost to you except for production of the billboard ads." And so we're very thankful for those types of opportunities, and we are going to continue to look for those. So what I would say is reach out to those organizations that you've been working with, see what they are willing to do, what's within their capabilities to do, and work with those that can now, and those that cannot, don't fret, they're going to be there. But work with what you have and as much as you can do with what you have. And you can reach us. Mary's email is at the bottom of the web page, and she's available to provide any information about what we're doing, and we can assist in any way we can. We just know that as we look at the numbers, Mary and I, we're thinking about all you guys across the state, and just hoping that all of this will not have been for naught. So please let us know if there's anything that we can help you with. And Katie, thank you so much for the opportunity to share these things.
Thank you so much, Berta.
Oh, so sorry, Katie.
Go ahead, Genesis.
Berta, there was one question. Folks are concerned since people are afraid of cross-contamination. How are you mitigating that on any material that you're handing out to the community?
Yes, and we're working with a vendor who is very much aware of the situation of the contamination of products that they might be placing in community. And so, they're wearing gloves, they're wearing masks. I mean, they're following all of the criteria that CDC has set in place. What we want to make sure, and we're open to suggestions, but what we're wanting to make sure is that the community will be receptive to that. And so that's why I mentioned that today we're going to be making a final decision whether we feel that, just as was brought up here, that question won't come into the minds of the residents who will see that on their door. And if it is, then even though it's a viable strategy, the timing may just not be right. And so I think that if we're asking ourselves that residents may ask themselves that, and we may need to think about the timing. So, yeah.
One suggestion I've heard with the inserts in the packages is to actually just do like stickers. So if people have like a resource for that, I think that that would be really helpful in getting the message out without having those fears of the contamination.
Yeah, and one thing that we were also thinking about, if anybody's done this, let me know, is for those organizations that are providing things in bags. I know the food bank has their large paper bags, you know, whether there's opportunity to print a message on there and provide them the bags as a resource so that they don't need to be spending their resource dollars on those type of things. The same thing with some of the schools, they are using just the white plastic bags that say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And so is there an opportunity to put a census message on those white paper bags and provide them with those resources again? So it's just about thinking about what are organizations using right now, and then how to help them with those resources by including a census message on there. So.
Thank you so much, Berta. And I believe we are at 1:01. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I think we can hang on for another minute or two if there are any other questions, but you know that we will be here next week on Monday at noon or 12 p.m. Central. So please bring your census questions with us, as well as share out your ideas and best practices as well. But we'll stay on for another minute or two. Thanks again so much, Berta, for sharing out what y'all are doing in San Antonio and Bexar County. Really inspiring, really thoughtful, and hopeful that people on the call can utilize some of those strategies in their areas too. But thanks everyone for joining us. And like I said, we'll hang on for another minute or two, and then we'll see you next week. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So Genesis, I don't know, at the end, Peggy O'Brien raised her hand, but I don't know if we got to her. I don't know. I don't think she left a question though.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I didn't see that one.
That's okay. Yeah.
All right, y'all. I think we're good.
Okay. Thank you so much. I hope that was helpful.
That was great. Thank you so much. Bye,
All right,
y'all.
We'll see y'all guys later. Okay. Bye.